Welcome back to the Friday Club Break Time with Interview series. This week I'm taking my break time with Alex Pudge, Head of Admissions at Alpha Schools. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me on. I've been watching the Friday session, so it's really lovely to be invited on one.
Really delighted to have you on. So I know a little about Alpha Schools, really looking forward to finding out more about your admissions process today. Alpha is the leading operator of UK independent schools, and I know that you range from early years all the way through to 17, 18. You have boarding schools, day schools, so it's a big role that you have. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be head of admissions for Alpha?
Okay, I've always worked in education or with education in one form or another since I finished sort of university. I've had teaching roles in the past and boarding house roles, and then a job came up at my old school, the school I went to, which is Luckton, which is now part of Alpha Schools. So it's all sort of come in a big circle, and it was for an admissions role, and I wanted to do something that was sort of people-based, but maybe coming out of a teaching role into something that was a little bit more office-based. And so doing registrar at Luckton was perfect because I wasn't going to get lost walking around the school, having been an old girl. And then I worked my way up as head of admissions, and then was recruited for Alpha, which there's not many opportunities to oversee admissions for a large school group, so I absolutely jumped at the chance.
Brilliant. And you've told me a bit before, Alex, about the ambitious growth that you aim for in the Alpha Group whenever a new school joins you. What are the first things that you look to implement with all of your experience in schools and school admissions that help you achieve that growth in enrolments?
So Mr. Khan invests in schools that he believes in and believes that he is going to be able to help and turn around. So all of the schools that we acquire or are invested in are ones that we personally believe in and that our directors believe are special and are going to be able to add value. So when I'm coming in as an admissions member of staff, I go on quite a sort of forensic basis where I will come into a school and I'll be looking with the sort of experience of being an admissions member of staff, but also thinking, what is that parent's journey going to be? So I might be looking first things at their data, so looking at the admissions that are coming in, past admissions, where are students coming from? So any admissions team needs to be looking at where are your students coming from, what kind of parents, what are their backgrounds. The admissions teams should be keeping that data. It's really important that you have an efficient and clear way of keeping data, not just things like child's birth dates and the geographical, but also you should be recording those conversations that you're having with parents, from that first phone conversation right down to when you're doing a tour. What things are parents picking up? What are they saying about your school as you're going around? What are they feeding back to you? What are their concerns? For instance, I've yet to not hear a prep school parent ask, not ask, how much swimming does my student do? How much swimming is my child going to do in a week? So that lets you know that a big part of your provision as a prep school, even if you haven't got a swimming pool, you probably should have swimming on your curriculum somewhere, because that's something that parents care about. Parents care about things like forest school. So are you providing it? And that's the stuff that, as an admissions member of staff, you should then be able to feed back to your senior leadership so that they can then implement that to improve your school provision. I'll be looking at everything from the minute I'm coming into a school. So what's the drive like? Is it easy to find? Is it clear where I'm going to be parking? What's that first impression I'm going to get of a school? So Prebendal, for instance, is one of our lovely little prep schools, and one of the nice touches that they do is they always put out visitor parking and they write the person's name. So immediately as a parent, your stress level is going to come down, because you're going to know where to park, you're not having to stress about it. And how welcoming is it to know that they've set aside a place that you're expected and that they've already started to get to know who you are and care about you as a person. And I think that begins to build that trust with a parent, knowing that if their child is at your school, that you're going to care about the child and the family, not just as a number, but really care about them. Yeah, everything then from how your reception staff are. You want people who are friendly, who are engaging, who are not too busy to deal with whoever is put in front of them. So those members of staff are the ones who I think quite often schools neglect to think about these things or to train staff properly in a way that a lot of sales jobs would. There's a tone of voice you're going to want to take on a phone to any parent coming in. And I think it's very easy, especially if you're a small school, to hire someone who's very good at admin, but maybe not as good with people or vice versa. And actually, it's so important in your hiring that you get someone who's both.
Absolutely. And those personal touches, I think, are important for every single type of school. Absolutely. But you have such a wide range of provision in the Alpha Group. Do you think there are any differences between admissions processes for, say, a boarding or a day environment as opposed to non-boarding, or, you know, even the differences between prep and somebody coming into an upper school? Does that change anything about what you'd say or how you'd engage a family?
I think the principles are generally the same, but I think it really is really important that your general school culture is also then embedded into your admissions. This is why you can't, and heads shouldn't just see admissions as admin. I think it's very easy, and I think schools that struggle a little bit quite often go, our admin team is just in the office. And you really do actually need to make sure that as a school culture, that your whole team, including your admin team, whether they are just, you know, doing data entry or anything else like that, that they absolutely are embedded in that school culture. And because they're the ones who are going to be picking up the phone to parents. So if they can't answer those questions about what the school ethos is, then you're already got parents who are going to be a little bit confused and are going to be getting, if not mixed messages, are going to be worrying how thorough as a school, whether you are actually telling them the truth about what your sort of school ethos and vision are. So if you are, so for instance, we've got some of our schools which are very selective, and yes, a selective IB, we've got a sort of independent grammar school, which is Chalfont. They're going to have a very different tone to how they go about their admissions, to how you're going to do maybe a nursery parent. I think if you take, you know, that sort of high academic tone, someone who's coming in for nursery and it's maybe their first child, then maybe it's a little bit much. So I think it's making sure that your message is consistent, but also that you are reacting to the parents and you're reacting to the area and you're keeping up with the time. I think a lot of schools make the mistake about feeling that they historically were something that maybe actually when you look at your parent demographic is not that. So if you've got lots of parents who are maybe what I would call a sort of first-time buyer of private schools, so both parents are professionals, they're busy, but this might be their first sort of foray into independent education, and that's going to be the majority of your parents, you maybe want to take, you maybe want to sort of think, you're not going to be selling yourself as a sort of status school, you're going to be listening to those parents and hearing what they want, and taking that sort of tone. And you know, you want to be professional and polite in all of your correspondence, but it's sort of choosing maybe how formal to informal you want to be in your admissions process and the tone.
Absolutely. And I guess that's why it's really important to record all of those conversations with parents as well, so that you can, you know, that will inform how you talk to future parents. Makes sense.
Yeah, and some of it, I mean, if you've got international boarding, for instance, there's quite, and there's, I mean, you should be getting all the data anyway of parents, but there's obviously more paperwork involved and more checks that you would want to do. So I think that those would be the main differences. And it's getting that balance right of making sure that you've got everything that you need to admit a student and have the information that you need so that you are the right fit, that you've got all the statutory stuff that you need, all the safeguarding things that you need. It's quite a busy, complex job at admissions, and I think it's quite often overlooked. And when you get a lot of change of staff, particularly, it's very easy to lose those things. So I think it's so important that not just that you've got an admissions policy in place, which all schools do have, but to have processes and to have them written down and clearly written out. I think COVID has taught us all you need to do is have your admissions member of staff off sick with COVID or something like that, and suddenly no one else in the office knows how to deal with a new admission. So it's really important to have those written down, and I'm a big fan of a flow chart personally, to make sure that things aren't getting missed, because all you need to do is to miss a few pieces of paperwork and then you failed an inspection. So again, these are things that sometimes I think heads and senior leadership can miss until it gets to inspection time, and actually this is stuff that should be audited very regularly.
And as a group, as large as Alpha, do you centralize that admissions process, or do you allow each school to have a different admissions process that suits their demographic?
It's a little bit of a mixture of both, to be honest. So our schools have got their own character, and the nice thing about working for Alpha is that we're not trying to put a corporate stamp on any of our schools. That's why even though we're trying to raise our group profile now, previously to this, we've always stood behind the schools and let the schools be face front. And that's what we want to continue to do, is that our schools have all got their own character, they serve their own local communities for the best of that local community, and we're not trying to change that. And so the admissions process, we are following best practice, which is our sort of corporate best practice, whether that's going to be policies, admissions, but each school is going to have its slightly own flavour and its slightly own way of doing that. Quite often with independent schools, you're dealing with old buildings, higgledy-piggledy, and so I think each school has to decide, sometimes a little bit through trial and error, what's going to be the best way of doing things, whether that's tours, or you're going to find things that work for your area and your demographic, and especially if you're international borders. I think COVID's changed things. I think most schools who deal with say, for instance, your German borders, previously we were used to having German borders probably from September through to the next month or two, would be coming in for visits, where the families would come and look at 4 different schools. Currently they can't, so they're doing it purely on that Zoom interview with you. So, and what digital presence you can put across. So I think there has been a bit of a shift, especially with international students now, where you cannot rely just on people coming in visiting. But I think the day market now, I think it's really important that schools, I think for the last 2 years, a lot of schools again have been not lazy on tools, but obviously with COVID we haven't been able to. I think now's the time to review what you've done previously in the past, but also get those parents in and looking around schools again. That's the best way for them to see what you offer and whether you're going to fit.
Absolutely. You've mentioned yourself actually, Alex, about the little touches, so things like having an assigned parking spot, having it marked with that family's name or that parent's name. And we have lots of talk about that topic on these interview series. Do you have any other tips or little things that admissions personnel can do that just make it seem more personalised, really easy for parents to come to an in-person visit?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's always worth admissions staff having time to do a bit of research. There's a lot of things that schools do really well, and I think there's also things that we can learn from international schools as well. The Americans are particularly good at the marketing side of things, but also they're very slick on their admissions style of things. One of the things I was impressed by looking at what some of the private American schools were doing is that sort of initial email to parents once they've made a first contact. They're embedding things like videos, so whether that is a welcome from the head or welcomes from students who are of the right sort of age. I think little tips you can do around the school is, and I think admission staff need to do this, is make sure you're walking around your school regularly so that you know your Tory, but also you know what's on your Tory, and are there any bits that need tidying up on the way through. And those are conversations that admission staff shouldn't be afraid to have with their heads, but also with their ground staff to make sure, and teachers, to make sure that everything is tidy and right. Really important things that you can do as well is make sure that the teachers know on a weekly basis ahead of time who's coming around, what their interests are. Again, this is why it's so important to keep those records and have those conversations, so that as you're walking around, you know that the staff are going to be able to greet the parents by name. Again, name badges can be very helpful. If you're running big open days, I'm a big fan of colour coding your badges, because again, you can then mark out for your heads and your staff which are current families, which are families who have been looked around, and this is their second time round, who are completely new families, because you're going to take a slightly different tone with those parents. And it's a very quick visual way for you to be able to manage to do that and sort of mentally index who the family are that you're going to be dealing with. If you've got international families who are coming into the area, I'm a big fan of making sure that if they're coming a long distance, being able to have a few hotels or bed and breakfasts that you can recommend that are going to be, nice, you've visited yourself, to be able to have a look around. It means that they've had a good night's sleep, which means that when they come and visit you, they're going to be in a good mood, had a nice time, and you're showing that you can go above and beyond. And just having that information to hand can be really useful, especially if you're dealing with international families and international agents. Also, things like having some local knowledge of the estate agents. I'm a big fan of reaching out to companies in the local area, people like estate agents, partly because you can advertise with them, and they will recommend your school when they are showing parents who are moving into the area. But also it's very helpful when you've got parents to be able to go, do you know what, these are a few good estate agents. If you're moving into the area, you might already have spoken with them, but these are guys that we would recommend.
Amazing. So really it's also about showing them what their life could be like if they were moving back over, or if their child was boarding. I think it's such a bigger picture. Yeah, we have to paint such a bigger picture.
Yeah, especially if you're a rural school. I think if you're one of the schools in the London belt, it's definitely a much easier sell because people understand London and they get it. When you are selling a school that is outside of that, you are selling a lifestyle as much as anything else. And that can really resonate with parents. If you are out, say one of our schools, Trinity is down in Devon, so they have got the sea on their doorstep. The girls can see the sea from their bedroom window. They've got a lovely little safe town down the bottom. It's very idyllic. They've got Dartmoor behind them, and you're selling that outdoor lifestyle. You're selling things like paddle boarding, and they're going to go walking, and there's Dartmoor ponies and those sort of things. It's those things that add to the character of the school.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting to hear. You've also brought up the topic of open days there, and I'm really pleased you did. It was one of the first things that got us talking, this topic of open days. And I know that you, like many schools, are probably really, really pleased that face-to-face is possible again. For these international families who perhaps can't come and visit in person, what things do you think that that admissions teams can do digitally to ensure that those families get the same great experience as perhaps parents who can come and visit you face to face?
I think it's important that admissions are having those chats with your marketing team to make sure that they're not just putting something out that's not relevant. So for instance, when I'm speaking to my Hong Kong families, they're not really that interested in cricket on the whole. You maybe get one or two, but cricket and rugby, not generally that interested. So when you're maybe designing your virtual open day, you maybe want to think about setting up different ones for different nationalities. It's tricky to generalize, but I think you can generally do the market research to work out where you're pitching so that you're not sort of wasting parents' time. So for instance, if you are doing a open day for sort of Hong Kong borders, then on your actual open day, do record things like your head's address so that they can be part of it, or even live stream it. There's no reason that you can't do that now. Other things that you might want to do is you can then do a virtual tour. So I know lots of schools are willing to put the outlay to actually do a proper sort of estate agent virtual tour, but there's nothing saying that if you want to do something a little bit more low budget, there's nothing saying that you can't just take a mobile phone and walk around the school, maybe with your head or with some students, and record that. One of the things I think that's really important as well is getting students' voices. I think parents and students want to know what life is going to be like in the school. So having interviews with students. We did one during COVID for Trinity, and it worked really well, and parents really enjoyed it, where we interviewed various different sort of students, very short videos of around about 2 minutes, just about why they came to the school, what they were enjoying, what they were doing. It wasn't high tech, it wasn't super sort of, it wasn't what I would call a promotional school video in the traditional sense, but it gave us sort of very honest, sort of candid view of what the school was like, because we didn't really edit what the children said, we let them be themselves.
Do you think that agents play a more important role when families can't come and see us face to face?
I think absolutely. I think it can depend a little bit, which demographic we're talking about. But yes, I think because of COVID now, I think parents are definitely relying more on agents. And there's a few countries where, unless you've got a permanent representative out there, especially like sort of Hong Kong and China, it's very difficult to get out there. And I think all the schools are feeling that. I think the agents are feeling it too. They're used to seeing us on a fairly regular basis, and to not do that is hard. Thank God for the internet, but I do think that it's very important to have those trusting relationships with agents, and again to be listening to them about what they want. So I think certainly as a company we're moving away more from just sending out our sort of standard prospectuses, because normally we would have these more nuanced conversations with parents, with the agents at their offices or at fairs. Obviously we can't attend them at the moment, so instead working with marketing, and I have to say thank you to my marketing department, they are fantastic, and producing very specialised bits of promotional material that is for those different sort of sectors, because what a German student is going to be looking for in a school is maybe slightly different to what a Chinese student is looking for. Your provision is going to be good and standardized, but I think it's just highlighting I had a friend who once put it saying it's a little bit like putting makeup on. Your face is going to be the same, but you're just highlighting the bits that you want to highlight.
Yeah, makes sense. A really good analogy.
Yeah.
Alex, I've really enjoyed talking to you today. Just before we wrap up, one of our favourite questions to ask our interview guests is, what is your favourite thing about working in independent education?
I think for me, it's I really believe in it. So I was independently educated. I am dyslexic, and I was told sort of age 4 or 5 that I probably would never learn how to read. I went to medieval history at university, and that is without any extra support. And that is entirely down to the teachers at Luckton and the fact that they believed in me, and they didn't make it a big deal. It didn't make it feel like I had anything different. And they, rather than they put the support in, but they also challenged me with much harder work and things that I was going to enjoy. And I think this is the key to independent education and independent teachers, because all independent schools, the budget is spent on the best teachers that you can afford. Like, regardless of, some independent schools have fantastic facilities, other ones, the facilities are maybe a little bit older and we're keeping them going and painting and it's that sort of thing. But the money is always going on the teachers in every independent school I've ever worked in, and they're dedicated, and they are absolutely dedicated to finding what your child loves and has passions and unlocking that. And I think that's what makes independent education so special.
Absolutely. And it's so nice when there's a personal story attached to it. And I'm sure that comes across when you're working with schools, when you're working with families. I've really, really enjoyed chatting today. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your insight with us. You've been a brilliant guest.
Well, thank you for having me on. And hopefully I can be helpful to other people in admissions. I think it's quite often, I think admissions staff and marketing staff can be not forgotten about in schools, but certainly maybe not thanked as often. And I think most of us are very aware, especially during COVID, that if we didn't get the results, then everyone else is going to suffer for it. So thank you to all the admissions teams and marketing teams out there.
Absolutely, more recognition would be well deserved, I think, for our marketing and admissions teams. Thank you, Alex. Really enjoyed today, and I know that we're really, really grateful for your insight.
Okay, well, thank you very much and have a lovely day.
Take care.
Goodbye.